Okay, in this recording I'm going to talk about my findings in something like astrocartography. Now, I don't do real astrocartography mainly because I don't understand it, but I just got my PhD and I'm looking for teaching posts, and I looked online and I was like, oh man, I can actually teach anywhere around the world. So where do I want to go? What I ended up doing is looking at a map of the world, which you can see right here, and trying to figure out some patterns. So one thing I noticed is that when I was in undergrad, okay, so to give you a little bit of background, I grew up in San Antonio, and there's a certain kind of life that I'm used to living in San Antonio. It's very, very Saturn, and so I looked at my own chart and was trying to figure out why the differences between the way I lived in San Antonio and the way I lived in California when I was there for 5 years were so different. My stay in California was very Mars, and my stay in San Antonio was very Saturn, and that's because my Mars and my Saturn are a certain distance apart in my own chart, and they map onto signs. And so I figured that there was something to astrocartography, but I really don't know how that works with all the lines and the medians and the crossings and all that other stuff. So I looked for something a little bit more basic, and I did it by studying history. So if you look at this map over here, you could see basically the world. I'll talk about the pole stuff in a second, but if you just think about history and the way these cultures work, I noticed that one of the places I'm planning to move is from San Antonio to Seattle. It's because Seattle has some radical people. They do some weird things, some interesting things. But also at around that longitude, you have Portland and Sacramento, also pretty weird. So there's a character that they have that differs from, say, the East Coast. The East Coast of the United States is very, very business, very detached or something. It's different. It's different from living in the South, in the Bible Belt. That's where I am. So to make a long story short, and this story takes about 2 weeks, but I'll speed it up for you. Uh, it turns out that certain longitudes basically correspond to certain signs, as they should when you think about it. The day starts. These people over here are way, way ahead of these people over here. And so when stuff is getting done, these people are finishing their day, while these people over here, well, no, these people over here will just be beginning it. So because of those differences, you would think that there were time differences as well, which actually correspond to the rotations of the houses. So, and that's how it is. Now, I did some research. I'll get back to this pole stuff in a second, but I did some research on the longitudes, and so now what you have is, a basic culture for your longitudes as you head past Greenwich and over to the international date line. And when you arrange these places, this is just a long list of cities that I got from Wikipedia, but when you arrange them, you basically find some coherent cultures that you might expect. And what I determined, based on how these places interact with each other, is that the western United States is basically the Pisces sector, and it moves over to Aquarius. So 12 is Pisces, right? Aquarius is 11, and so on and so forth. And another thing that I did, there's some math involved. I had to do a couple of corrections because if you read my book, Full Spectrum Astrology, or Hayden's Book of Synastry, you know that there's a certain kind of character that these angles have. 19s, for example, are associated with sexuality. And if you have taken a look at Seattle, San Francisco, and Portland, you know how that goes. So actually, when I did the duodecanate corrections, which you find in the other books, these things came out to be something like 23. It was okay, but if you subtract 4, you get something that is more like the culture that we know and love. So the corrected duodecanate is basically the longitude plus a little window minus, it's divided by, I don't know, I think it's like 2.5, and then you add 4 duodecanates over, and you get a good description of these cultures. I mean, it makes some sense. So in San Antonio, we're very family oriented. It's very moral, and sure enough, Mexico City, San Antonio, and I guess in some weird way Austin, all fit the 28s. And you can just do this across the world. And so that's the longitudes. Now it turns out that the longitudes basically decide the culture's relationship to the rest of the world. And so when we start looking at these places that are very, what is the word? Showy. They have 11s. Another thing that I thought was really interesting here is that if I scroll down, some people talk about how history books are written very heavily from the European perspective, and that is true. But what you find is that Europe occupies the Libra clusters for beauty and communication. But farther over, when you go to these places, like Rome, for example, there's a lot of Virgo in there, a lot of determination of knowledge. I found this really, really interesting. So basically, the sign cluster by longitude gives the place's relationship to the rest of the world. I also had some other questions, and the question was, well, what about latitude? If we can look at longitude and we can look at latitude, then, well, if we can look at longitude, we should be able to look at latitude. Latitude is going to be how high up you are given the relationship to the equator. So I was thinking about what we know just about plain old behavior, plain old sociology. And there is some research that says in the hotter the environment, the more aggressive the people are, like the moods of the people are like, you know, and that makes sense because it's hot out there. So what you see is a map of the world, and one of the first things we note that is around the tropics of Cancer and Capricorn, right around here, you got this little burn mark, and that's because the Earth has its rotation, right? The Earth is tilted at 23 degrees, and it goes around the sun like this. And so when it's the northern hemisphere up here, let me kind of move for the camera. If you've got, I wish I had it like a thing. Oh yeah, I can use this right here. Okay, so this is the Earth right here, and here's the North Pole, except we're tilted at 23 degrees like this. And so we're in the northern hemisphere, and if the sun is sitting right here, then it's summertime for these people on this side of the solar system. But at the other point in the year, it's winter time because the sun's rays going this way, like that, are not hitting these areas as directly. Okay, so if you're closer to the equator, right around here, then you're always going to get a kind of stable amount of sun. But if you're closer to the poles, there will be times where with the sun sitting here and you up here, you're just not going to get any sun at all. Like if you're living up here, you're going to keep going like this, and but the sun is over there. So guess what? You get months of midnight or months of nighttime. Okay, so what does that have to do with this astro stuff? Well, the idea is that as you move farther away from the equator and you go farther north, you're going to get less summer type behaviors and more winter type behaviors for either culture. So if I go farther south, it's going to get colder, it's going to get more winter-like. And if I go farther north, it's going to get more winter-like as well, and then it's summer in between. The tropics of Cancer and Capricorn right here and right here represent those points where season-wise, now see, I was looking at it like this, going like this. But as far as the Earth is concerned, the sun is basically doing this, sitting there, and then like this, sitting there, sitting there, and sitting there. So while it's sitting in this location down here, it's hot, right? And so what we get is this southern desert burn down here. I'm sure this is basic geography, but I didn't know this. So I'm looking at the map. And then when we're up here, near the other tropic, we get a northern desert burn right there. Okay, so what does this mean? Well, in between, you get this kind of extreme, right? So the places right on the equator tend to be very fertile. So we've got a fertile area of Africa, and then we've got a fertile area of South America. And if you're living there, I just had a kind of layman's theory that you struggle more because, man, it's really, really raining, and then it's you know, the seasons change and you're gonna have to work hard and all that business. You struggle if you're here, and but you're at zero Cancer basically. And how's my time? Okay, it's good. Uh, but you're at zero Cancer, but you get up here and it's hot, and so you're doing this kind of 15-degree thing. And then to spare you some of the math, I basically concluded that this is zero Cancer, and going up you get to zero Leo and zero Virgo, and then all the way at 90 degrees you get to something that is the most winter-like, and that's going to be most like Capricorn. But if you go all the way south, you're going to get something most winter-like again, and that's also most like Capricorn. So what I did is take this 90-degree arc and have it cover 6 of the signs, and so I divided by 15, and then you get something called a pole culture. I don't know what else to call it. The pole culture is basically the way these people are. Now, I rearranged by latitude. You don't see it here because it's a little bit of trouble in Excel. And the pole culture basically represents the people's mood. So if you've got people around the equator, then they're basically behaving in zero Cancer ways. But if you've got people who are farther north, then it's Leo, and so on until you get to a pole culture of Capricorn, where the people are pretty... Actually, sorry, it's Pisces up here, and I think it's... Oh, crap, I get confused. Anyway, it's something like Pisces up here and Aries down there. See, I said it was Capricorn, but it's actually not. If you think of the kind of stern Norwegian stereotype, you know, it's like, you know, Finland or something like that, then you really get sections which are more like the Capricorn behavior here. And so once I did the math, I got a pole culture, and this is the people's mood. So between the pole culture and the sign cluster, you basically get a description of any place in the world. So I'm looking for places to go teach, and I find, for example, that I don't know, let's just say, where's the places? Okay, so look at Ibiza, right? Ibiza, Spain, party city, right? On the one hand, it's very social with respect to the rest of the world, but on the other hand, the people's mood is very declaratory, and that makes kind of, you know, it makes sense in terms of if you were to go there, how would you expect to be treated by people? So anyway, I could go on and on about this, but the point is that this isn't quite astrocartography as I understand it. I haven't researched astrocartography very heavily, but this is one way of using duodecanates and some basic anthropology, not basic anthropology, cultural geography, I guess, to describe what's going on in any place in the world. The longitude is going to tell you the sign cluster, the cluster's relationship, and the latitude is going to tell you the pole culture, how you can expect to be treated. One other thing, so it was actually a kind of struggle to get these things the way they were. Like I was messing around with the difference between San Antonio and Austin, and the difference between New York and Baltimore, and I was trying to find some kind of offset for these numbers. And ultimately, one of the things that helped me narrow it down was the notion of beauty. If you try to look for beauty in the world or in certain cultures, you invariably, according to Western training, end up in a couple of major places: Europe and Japan. So it turns out that the Europe cluster is Libra, and the Japan cluster is Taurus, and that makes sense. Also, another thing, as far as beautiful people and standards of beauty, again, it's basically the Western European standard, because, you know, that's how the history books are written. And so as you go farther north, you get more of this kind of mellow feel, which is coming away from the tropics and the equator. It's just something to note for travel if you're interested in going places on the basis of, I don't know, astrology or something like that. I actually am, because I don't care to travel very much unless I can observe the culture and try to compare it to things that I know. So I actually would use this to pick a travel destination just because, you know, you can go anywhere. But there you go. That's my foray into something like astrocartography. I hope this is useful and interesting to